So yeah, as Mark said, I graduated in 2020, so I'm turning 26 in April, which feels pretty weird. I might not look that much older, but I definitely feel like I'm getting older. Um, but yeah, so a little background about myself. I'm from Brookfield, Connecticut. We've got to have some Connecticut people in here, right? 2, 3, 4. That's good. So Richfield's in Fairfield County, which is north of New York. Came to Bentley for college. Graduated in 2020. I was a data analytics major and a finance minor. So I remember they actually just started that major, the data and analytics major, I think when I was a sophomore or junior. One of my math teachers, Emmy Roth, I'm not sure if she's still here, if anyone has her, she was great. She actually recommended me to try out this program. Really great, really glad I did that. It kind of combines, a lot of like the math and stats and I think like coding that some of you guys might find interesting, but also a lot of like that, interaction with the business and not really committing to the whole back office scene. But yeah, as Mark mentioned, I worked at the Sandbox. I think that was a great opportunity. Highly recommend it if any of you, are passionate about technology. Looks great on the resume, and it's also just a great learning experience to start working with people. When I was there, I tutored Python and database management and SQL. I was involved in some projects that Mark kind of spearheaded. One of them was we did some sentiment analysis on Twitter data. So we built a little app to kind of pull tweets from Twitter during the 2016 election and kind of put it through a little sentiment analysis to see who was happy with Trump, who was not happy with Trump. A lot of interesting results from that. I play soccer, played it my whole life. I'm still playing in New York. I do have a list of accomplishments here. And the link is, I think I have to exit the PowerPoint to show this, but let's see. This is very important. So, this is actually, I think 2017, 2018 Bentley intramural champion, 10-0 record right there. That's our team, pretty proud about that, so toss it in the deck. Let's play from here. I have 2 dogs. I'm going to put a shameless picture there. They're Samoyeds. We got them when I was in college, but they're pretty awesome. I like to fish. Every September, my dad, my brother, and some family friends go to Martha's Vineyard to compete in the fishing derby. So that picture is on the shore of Martha's Vineyard. I think that's an albacore, false albacore. Yeah, that's just a little bit about my background. So I work for Brookfield Properties. I'm assuming a lot of you are interested in commercial real estate or real estate in some capacity. So I want to talk a little bit about Brookfield's structure and where my team kind of fits into that. Brookfield Asset Management is essentially the top level of the Brookfield company. They have $900 billion in assets under management in probably everything under the sun. Our largest portfolio is real estate, which is, I think, what Brookfield's known for. But we also deal in equities, renewables. We're doing some cool things with energy credits and getting involved in sustainability. We also work in insurance. So it gets pretty confusing pretty quickly, but this is a pretty simple version of it. So I work for Brookfield Properties, which is a separate company which can be considered that real estate branch of Brookfield Asset Management. So within Brookfield Properties, we have a portfolio of assets, which are properties in our case, across various sectors, right? So there's office, retail, logistics, residential. Those are probably the big four. Most of our portfolio is in office, which is the portfolio that I've supported historically, although now we're kind of trying to aggregate some of the technology across the different sectors, because historically they've been kind of siloed. So it gets kind of tricky when we have to roll everything up and then report it to BAM, which I might get into later. But that's our CEO, Bruce Flatt. If you follow the commercial real estate space, you might see him speaking on the news every now and then. This is a picture of Brookfield Place, New York. So I currently live in Manhattan, and that's where I go to work. It's down in the financial district, so if any of you are from New York or familiar with New York City, you may have come across Brookfield Place, but that's just one of a bunch of different, Class A office buildings that we have in Manhattan and across the US and Canada. So I think it would be helpful to kind of walk through my journey at Brookfield since joining. I joined in 2021, and I'll kind of walk through everything that we've worked on up until today, and try and go over a lot of the kind of process of what a data analyst does on a day-to-day basis in the context of real estate. So I do owe a lot of this to Mark in the CIS Sandbox, because this whole path really started in 2019. I got an internship with a company called VTS. They're a pretty big player in commercial real estate. They're a technology company that has several products. One of their big ones is a platform for brokers to manage their deals and for asset managers to manage their properties. And I think I owe getting that internship to working at the Sandbox, being able to speak to how I've worked with students. So that was kind of key. After I graduated, I had a short role at Cigna Health Insurance as a data analyst. Not super eventful there. That was peak COVID quarantine. I was working remotely. After about a year of that, I was so sick of just sitting in my room all day. I was not very proactive about working, and I wanted to, move on to a new role where I was, going into the office and getting more done. Eventually, the opportunity with Brookfield came up. I think my experience at VTS was very helpful, because Brookfield and the big real estate players partner with VTS. So when I first started, I was hired onto Brookfield Properties' office data and analytics program, which had at that time just been started by my manager. So there really wasn't a team. So it was a little scary being like a recent college grad and kind of stumbling into this role where you're kind of in the foundational part of a team, and then you have a little bit of that imposter syndrome that kind of sinks in, like, oh, this is a really big company, it's an established company, they're really gonna they're relying on me to build out this team. But I think you kind of, once you step into a role, you kind of realize that most of the time it's not as intense and as scary as you think it is. But yeah, so when we first got there, there was basically a need for the office portfolio and the asset managers, so the people basically managing all of the properties and trying to run them as efficiently as possible. Because at the end of the day, all of these properties are investments. So, you know, in our scope at Brookfield Properties, we really are concerned with like day-to-day operations of the property, how we can save money, the best way to lease spaces, all the way down to like how the building is marketed, how we're finding new tenants, the tenant experience. A lot of that stuff is very important. But then when you take a step back into Brookfield Asset Management's world, it really is just a fund of investments to them, and they want a good return, right? So basically the task was, we have, you know, a decade of proprietary data that we're sitting on, right? All the leases we've signed in the past 10 years, how much we charge them for rent. We have all of the debt information and loans on all of our buildings. And basically, we should probably start leveraging that to help monitor our assets, maybe analyze the different markets that we're in, which markets are, you know, showing signs that we should get out of them, which markets should we enter. So the first kind of part of that process, and I think is important for kind of any role when you're starting, is understanding the business. Like Brookfield is a massive corporation. Like I'm still finding stuff out. Like things are still starting to make sense even to today. So I think like an important part is to just do your best to like proactively ask questions, understand how your business operates, which teams are responsible for, you know, which aspects of the business. Also just learning everything about like the real estate industry. You know, doing the research on what companies, what competitors there are, just the terminology around like leases and lease accounting, financing. It's all important, and at the end of the day, like you can be very smart and technically capable, but if you enter a role and you have no idea what the data means because you just aren't familiar with any of this terminology, then you know you're not really going to be able to make impactful decisions from that. So another part of it is building business relationships. So this is something that really you'll probably start experiencing after college once you're in the workforce, is that at least for larger companies, I mean it depends on the size, but you know every company has a different dynamic, right? The dynamic of a startup is going to be a lot different from a corporation like Brookfield that's been around for forever, has like 5,000 employees across North America, and you're gonna have to figure out how to best work with the other teams, right? So as a data and analytics team, our stakeholders are really the asset managers, right? So our purpose really is to leverage all the data, provide analytics, maybe even predictive modeling to help the asset managers make the best decisions that increases, you know, the efficiency of the building, therefore increasing the return on the asset, therefore, you know, making the fund more efficient, increasing the stock price of the business, right? So it's all that chain that happens there. And it's a lot easier to get stuff done if you're on good terms with the people that you have to work with. So I think that's kind of like an underrated part, is like get to know the people you're working with at a business level, but also at a personal level. You know, try and have like in-person meetings with them, spend time with them, because like ultimately you're not just going to be able to rely on yourself to, you know, get what you need to get done. Okay, so over here I just have some examples of some of like the systems that are used in the real estate space. So Argus Enterprise is a common tool for cash flow forecasting. So they do a lot of different scenarios of what might happen in the building. Okay, what if our revenue goes up by 5%? How does that affect everything? If this certain expense increases by X amount, then what happens? So that's a common tool used. Chatham Financial is where a lot of the mortgage and debt data comes from and is stored. I spoke to VTS, and Yardi is a pretty standard property accounting system. Okay, so I joined late in 2021, fast forward to 2022. Now I'm really sitting down with my manager. We have a few offshore consultants that are working with us. And we really have to kind of build the groundwork of a data team, right? So one of like the first steps is, aggregating all of our data that we have across all these source systems that I just mentioned. Whereas historically, business users are logging onto Chatham, downloading an Excel file, logging into Yardi, downloading an Excel file, doing this for potentially even dozens of systems. So I think the main purpose of a data warehouse is essentially having a large centralized storage where you can pull the data from all these source systems, have it in one place, kind of connect them together, and then use that for either some sort of modeling or some sort of visualization. So we use this company called Cherry. If you're interested in commercial real estate and specifically data and technology, highly recommend looking into this company. They kind of specialize in offering data warehousing solutions specifically for commercial real estate companies. And some technologies behind the scenes are Google BigQuery. GraphQL is a framework for, I think it was made by Facebook a while ago, that's used for querying databases, similar to how you would do SQL. So that's kind of like the stack in terms of data storage, SQL Server. We use a lot of Microsoft products, so if you are going to be interning or are interested in a company that likely uses Microsoft products, like in the financial services industry or real estate, if they're using a couple, they're probably going to use the Microsoft solution for everything. So Microsoft Azure is Microsoft's cloud computing, cloud storage service, so something to consider. Then we have to build all of our ETL, right? ETL stands for extract, transform, load, and that's the process that on a daily basis is going to take the data from those source systems and put them into your warehouse, and then potentially from the data warehouse to somewhere else. That takes some work up front because you have to work with people on the source system, figure out how to get data from their internal database into yours. So that's usually kind of like an initial kind of project in and of itself. So that did take a lot of time, right? Setting up that data warehouse is a really important piece. It's gonna take a lot of time, but you really have to do that right and like try and think of everything that you might need in the future, which is impossible, right? Like you're always gonna have to go back, maybe add some more data, but you want to set it up in a way where doing that is simple. You don't want to have it set up in a way where, oh crap, like we forgot that maybe the team in LA uses this one specific tool, whereas everyone in the other regions uses something else. Now we have to bring that in, but we didn't design the storage or the database tables in a way to let it in, you're gonna have a problem. So definitely want to stress that like that's a very important piece. I did not really necessarily have like a data engineering background, so it was a really great experience to kind of learn how that happens. most of the time you will likely be joining a team that probably already has that built out or a solution for that. And then moving on, I also have Excel here. Like, yeah, we're a data team, but you have to work with the business, and the business has historically used Excel for everything. Excel's never gonna go away, like in my opinion. It's really powerful for like 70% of what people are trying to do. So fortunately, if you're using the Microsoft suite of products like Azure, Power BI, they integrate pretty well. But the next part is creating reporting foundations. So we have, all these requests and from the business, right? Okay, we want this. We want to analyze all of our debt data. We want something to look at all the leasing on our properties. But an important part of that is kind of sifting through that and working with the business to determine what is necessary on like day 1, what's necessary on day 10, and what could wait for next year, right? So kind of separating like immediate needs, prioritizing those, and then coming back to some of like the lesser priority items. And then, so dashboarding, I'm not sure if there are classes that are specifically dedicated to data visualization and 160? CS 160, all right, register for that next semester. Because I can't stress enough, even if you're not necessarily interested in a technical role in real estate or whatever it may be, even if you just want to be an analyst of some sort, knowing how to use one of these tools like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, you may have heard of, Looker is another one. Knowing how to use one of these is just going to drastically help you and allow you to like help your team in significantly more ways. It's, I think, pretty underrated how much more value you get out of a Power BI dashboard where you can interact with it, pick what your filters are, dynamically look at a report as opposed to just clicking through, static Excel files. If you start thinking about immediate needs of business, a lot of the times it's saving time, eliminating time they're wasting on inefficient processes. I guarantee you if you join a team and you can create a Power BI dashboard or something that completely eliminates this very mundane process they have to do, you will get a lot of praise for that. So we use Microsoft Power BI, and I didn't know, I had never used this tool before I started. I had tried to learn a little bit of Tableau when I was applying for jobs, but I was able to learn it on the job. It took some time, but I think something that definitely helps is having some background in SQL and database management, because that's kind of like the underlying structure behind a lot of these tools. But I will say, if you haven't started looking into these tools, definitely start now. Any exposure you have before you get into the working field will significantly help. So I think this could be like a little example of like what kind of dashboard might be relevant in real estate. And this is actually pretty much what the first product that we made was, and was like the first demand. So you have a business problem where, and this was, the case of Brookfield, right? We have regional markets, DC, New York, LA, Denver, Chicago, and then all of Canada as well. Each region kind of operates sort of in a silo. They aggregate their reporting, that gets sent to kind of like a corporate layer, and then it goes to BAM. So when they have to do this like quarterly reporting, they're going through all those source systems that I showed in the beginning. They're compiling all this data for over, some regions might have 50 different office buildings. So they're going through all these source systems, they're manually pulling all this data, they're creating these like cash flows, and that might take them about like 2 weeks at the end of each quarter. And that's kind of like, they can't really get around that. They need to have this reporting for upper management. A solution, let's create a data warehouse, let's put the initial investment into working with these teams, these systems, have the data in so that if I have my mortgage information, right? Most of these office buildings have a very large mortgage, a debt associated with them. Let's say that lives in Chatham, which is one system, and my loan is for $300 million, 10 years, and there's a column that says the property that it's taken out against, and it says 250 Vesey Street, which is one of the offices in New York. That system isn't built to integrate with our accounting system. Those are separate companies providing separate solutions. They don't need to standardize anything. So when I need to marry that with my accounting data, but my property name in my accounting system maybe is 250 Vesey, and someone messed up and spelled out 250. Like, how am I gonna really programmatically join that data together? That issue is what you kind of have to work through when you're first creating a data warehouse. You kind of have to put the initial groundwork in to try and standardize how the data is structured in all the systems. So, the next part of that solution is, okay, let's leverage something like Power BI, where upper management, it's just a link, they can go to it, they don't need these massive Excel files downloaded, they can just search a property name, boom, it all comes up, next page, financials, next page, leasing, your major tenants. So, before I go to the next slide, so has anyone here taken, I think, Mark, what is the CS course for database management? CS 150. Has anyone here taken CS 150? Okay, so maybe this next slide isn't super relevant, but behind the scenes you need a data model, which is essentially just describing how your entities in your business relate to each other. So I can just kind of walk through this. These are some of the key kind of entities or objects that you're going to face with when trying to build this dashboard. And you essentially kind of have to figure out how you want to set it up and how you want to make these relationships occur, right? So I could say, what's our starting point, right? If we need to combine all this data, what's our starting point? Well, we have properties, right? Like, one property should have, I should be able to get from my building to its accounting information, the tenants, the leases, the units, which are basically just, you could think of them as floors. Sometimes they will split them up a little further than that. You have tenants and you have leases. But you might say, okay, well, and this might seem, this might seem a little trivial, but you might say, oh, well, my property has 10 tenants, right? So when I search for one property, behind the scenes, I have to have some sort of relationship between the property and the tenants. And then you might say, oh, well, each of those tenants, the tenant in this case being, it could be Facebook, it could be Google, it could be any company leasing office space. They might have, a couple leases. But about it is, well, no, properties don't have tenants. There's no real relationship with the tenant and the property. The tenants are really connected to the building through a lease, right? So they sign a lease, which is, you know, a contract that says, I'm going to lease this amount of space for 10 years at this rate. So you might want to, it might be more beneficial in the end when you start doing some of this analytics to have it set up in certain ways. So that's just one example where an alternative way to think about it is that a property has this kind of historical ledger of leases that, and the tenant is really just an attribute of that lease. Not necessarily that, okay, you know, my property has, you know, this specific list of tenants. So moving on to 2023, this is a little more technical and more so for if you're interested in data and working on a technology team. But it is important, I think, to understand. Has anyone heard of agile software development? That's no. It's very simple. It's really just a way to structure how your team works. So it doesn't necessarily need to have anything to do with technology. The key takeaway from that is that you work on projects in an iterative process, as opposed to just saying, these are my goals, in 3 months we're going to have this product, it's going to be done. We're going to say, maybe our initial goal is 3 months, but every week we're going to reconvene, we're going to get feedback from the business, and then we're going to incorporate that into the next week. And I think that's more so just something to mention about, I think you could take away something from that, you know, working on any team. It's a pretty, you know, popular way to structure your work. Another quick point on the technology side is creating different environments. So when you're creating a product, you typically have 3 separate distinct environments: a development environment, a testing environment, and a production environment. The whole point of this is that if I have this dashboard or I have something that key business users are using, so let's say that asset summary dashboard gets approved, and now the CFO of Brookfield Properties is looking at this every day instead of the reports that he was getting mailed to by the region heads. That's a pretty big deal, and if it's wrong, that's a pretty bad situation. So the whole point of this is to just mitigate, you know, having those types of errors happen in the version that's facing the end users. So by splitting it up into 3 environments, you kind of have, I know that if I'm working on something, it can't even touch what the user's seeing, because I have 3, you know, distinct kind of versions of it, and then you can push changes through. I think this is more applicable to, you know, outside of data is, this is just, I think, something about learning how to you know, work with in a fast-paced team. We started getting a lot of projects because, and not just from like asset management, for example. Different teams in the company, like let's say marketing finds out that, you know, we make this product, and now they're like, oh, well, I want a dashboard to see all of our engagement on Facebook versus LinkedIn versus marketing. This is something I kind of took away from my manager. So he was kind of the one responsible for deciding, yes, no, we're going to do that project for you. We can't do that project for you. And it was interesting to see his reasoning. And a lot of the time it's that you have to manage kind of the expectations from certain business groups and sometimes prioritize one work over the other. And it can be hard to do because if you turn down projects from people, people might take it personally. They might not want to work with you again, but, and also making a lot of mistakes. I mean, when you are actually in the working world, no one freaks. I mean, if you get a bad manager, they might freak out on you, but like you can make mistakes. Like you have to make mistakes. It's really the only way you're going to learn what the right way to do something is. I think you shouldn't worry about making mistakes, but you probably should worry about making the same mistakes more than once. So definitely try and like learn from the first, failure or first mistake and try and incorporate that going forward. So just wrapping up where we are like here today, we now have a much bigger team. We have a VP, director, a data engineer, data scientist, several data analysts, some consultants, and we work very closely with business analysts. So if you're not necessarily taking that technical route, maybe you're interested in a role like a BA or business analyst, which works more directly with the business. And I would still recommend, even for that role, exploring some of these tools like Power BI. Because what we're seeing now is it's sort of becoming this standard for an analyst to have some sort of exposure to dashboarding. Because it really is just where historically it would be Excel, right? Like you're an analyst, I'm making my Excel models, I'm doing this. Taking it to dashboarding is just kind of the next natural process of that. We have 10 plus dashboards that are used across different business functions. We have a huge backlog. Just cognizant of time here. So some takeaways. I think it's important if you establish credibility. The important thing is for your team to like establish credibility. Like you want your work to represent your team, right? Like if you consistently give one department, crappy half-assed work, but because you're too busy prioritizing one, then that's going to reflect on your entire team. You might miss future opportunities to work with that team. And then once you establish that credibility, like you have to maintain it. So that means like any work that you may have done in the past, just because you're done working on it and you're on to the next project, doesn't mean you can kind of forget about it. Like you want to have a relationship with that business user to support them if they have questions and be available. Going forward, we're just trying to aggregate as much data as possible. There are some exciting use cases in real estate that we haven't really gotten to. If you think about alternative data, such as like foot traffic data, there are some firms that are doing really cool predictive modeling by using street foot traffic data or satellite data to kind of gauge where this flow of traffic is going. To maybe like structure the property in a better way to like increase throughput. That's probably a little bit more applicable to retail, where a big part of retail is getting people to your store. So that's kind of on the horizon, but as I mentioned, the more immediate needs right now are just to kind of revamp some of the reporting needs. This is kind of just an overview of kind of like the life of a data analyst. You could still take this as applicable to a business analyst. The fundamental part of this I want to stress is the beginning, the business question. You really want to make sure that you define the problem well. So when you're working with some of these teams, let's say I'm working with leasing, and they're like, okay, we noticed that in downtown Manhattan, like where our leasing activity is going down by like 5% every month. Like, you know, what are we doing wrong? Like that's pretty vague, but if you sit down with them and like take the time in the beginning to ask them a bunch of questions and say like, okay, well, what brokers do you have assigned to what buildings? Like, how many deals have they been closing historically? Like, it could be, you might be able to find some sort of pattern of, you know, something that's not really working out well. But if you let the business question be defined vaguely, then it's going to be hard to, you know, provide something that's like impactful for the business user. Because if you have a very distinct question you're trying to answer, it's much easier to evaluate how well you did at answering it. So, yeah, I think we can spend the rest of the time about Q&A, and it doesn't have to be technology related or data related. Happy to just answer any questions about real estate in general. Happy to share, you know, what I've learned in the past few years. And for Mark, here is a QR code.
So let's take a few minutes after you scan that for questions and or reactions to John's talk.
Question?
Yeah, what steps did you take at Bentley to get your internship?
Can you repeat the questions?
Sure. So the question was, what steps did I take at Bentley to, you know, get my internship? I think it was really about, you know, you're in a tough position when you're in college, and you know, you're still like an undergraduate to like get experience, right? So I think a big part of it is how can you get experience given your situation, right? So the sandbox, you know, was a great kind of opportunity to do that, where you don't necessarily need to start with like a company or like working at this intern. I mean, how are you going to do that? The only way you're going to do that is if you know someone who literally gives you the role, right? So I think you just have to be like proactive about getting different experiences, no matter how in-depth they are, because I think it just shows that you're trying and you're doing these things. Also, I think personal projects is a big one. I could have done more of that, didn't really do that much of that. I mean, you can showcase your coursework, right? If you did a group project and you analyzed, you know, a real estate market or something, definitely put that on your resume, you know, attach it in the attachments when you're applying. But even if not, you know, you can go out of your way to just, you know, do some research. You know, there's a lot of options out there, but I think, yeah, it's a good start. Up here? Yeah.
What would you say your work-life balance is like?
Sure. So asking about work-life balance. So it is, it's definitely gotten busier recently. And that's just because I have taken on more responsibility after being on the team for a while. But I think it should always be doable, and I think something to keep in mind is that if you are starting to become concerned, like that is something you should talk to your manager about. Like that is something you should like voice or say. But that being said, things are getting busy now, but I just work 9 to 5, right? If something comes up overnight, right, like maybe one of these dashboards we have, there's a big issue, it goes to executives, all of our cash flows are wrong or something, we work late to fix that, as soon as possible, depending on who the stakeholder is. But work-life balance is it's good. So, and I think you are empowered to to dictate that. I think you have more control over it than it may seem, at least from my experience. Every industry is different. I can't speak to other companies, but I can speak highly of Brookfield Properties. Yeah.
Do you remember what classes you took?
So what classes did I take? It was decades ago, but I'll try my best. Yeah, so I did the data and analytics program, which was mostly CIS courses and some math courses, but a lot of the MA courses are designed for this kind of analytics in a business context. So like working on business problems as opposed to like what you might expect some of the MA classes to be, which is just like doing a bunch of math. There's a good amount of like statistics, I think, involved, which can help. I also minored in finance, so I took a good amount of the finance courses. I think one that I really liked was when I took junior or senior year. It was the credit course on debt. Can't remember who my professor was, but yeah, I didn't necessarily take any real estate focused courses. I kind of stumbled into this industry, but I don't think that's like a requirement. I think what you can do is if you're interested in real estate and there's no immediate specific real estate courses you can take, I would take like finance and accounting, because at the core of real estate is finance and accounting. People are running these properties because they're a business, right? They have cash flows, they have balance sheets, income statements. That all is extremely relevant still. So I think having a good foundation in finance and accounting definitely helps. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey, I work for Fairfield Properties in Long Island, and I find like my job is very repetitive.
Mhm.
Because you work like with the RE and stuff. Do you think your job is like repetitive?
So I'll repeat it, but I think most people got that. So on the concept of your job kind of becoming repetitive, so I think sometimes yes, like there are responsibilities that you need to fulfill. What I would like recommend is take some time to try and like break down the process of that you find you're repeating a lot, and figure out which steps of those can kind of be like automated or kind of made more efficient. So a tool that I would recommend looking into is Power Automate. It's a Microsoft tool. I think it should be free probably for one user, and it's a low code to no code tool. So you basically can like drag and drop and kind of build a process. So for example, if you are exporting something from Yardi, like a rent roll or something, and then maybe you have to add a column or do one more thing and then put it into SharePoint, like most of those processes can be automated. So you know, even if you don't have experience, I think there are options that you could get into that without a serious technical background.
So you have time for one more question? Who's up last week today?
Yes.
Do you find yourself like doing like a specific routine every day before you go to work or when you're at work, or is it like it changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I basically wake up, I get on the subway, I get into the office, I make my oatmeal, I get a banana, and I make a nice coffee, and then I sit at my desk. But yeah, no, I mean, I really do that. But I think, you know, it depends on the type of person. If like a routine helps you, I think it's good to have one. Our team's pretty flexible, so we work from home. We can work from home twice a week. So I think I find that if I put in 3 days in a row at the office, that's sort of when I kind of get a little burnt out of doing this routine and commuting and yada yada. But then I can kind of work from home a day, kind of do things a little differently, maybe make breakfast instead of doing something quicker. You know, I think it's inevitable. Part of it will start to feel like a routine, but I think it can be good.
What about at work? Do you do the same kinds of things in your company every day, or is it
So-
different as well?
No, so now it's kind of like a combination. There are some things that there are daily kind of check boxes you might have, like checking in with your team, like a daily stand-up call. That happens every day, 9:30. I'm meeting with my team. I'm finding out, you know, how everyone's progress is going on their projects. I'm responsible for keeping track of the reporting on all of, you know, people on our team and, you know, the projects they're working on. You know, there are emails I need to send out every Tuesday, every Wednesday. But then, before I know it, my boss would come to me and say, you know, the CFO, for example, has been pretty involved with their team recently because they have a big initiative on changing where they do their financial, their FP&A. So my boss might tell me, you know, Ricky Tang wants to explore this, drop everything, let's start working on a solution. So I think, you know, in my experience, it's a good balance of like, okay, keep the lights on, right? But you need to be like ready to, you know, drop everything. Because at the end of the day, it's like stakeholders, right? I mean, probably hear that a lot in the GB classes and whatnot, but like, you know, you want to keep them happy and, you know, prioritize their needs. So if that means putting something on pause that you're just about to finish, it is what it is. But I think that's the exciting part, right? You know, you want to kind of be on your toes.